Home prices continue to climb with demand still outstripping supply.
100 other people applied for my apartment.
How did the Bay Area's housing crunch get this bad?
We can't afford a home here.
$500K doesn't get you anywhere.
It has become unaffordable, and we were not prepared.
Housing has become simply a nightmare. Rents are sky high, house prices are exorbitant, while salaries haven't risen nearly quickly enough to compensate. Housing crises differ from place to place, but they are especially pronounced in the English-speaking world. From Vancouver to New York, Melbourne to Sydney, and Dublin to London, low and middle income earners are increasingly getting priced out and pushed out. The effects of housing crises are widespread. According to the so-called housing theory of everything, these effects include inequality, climate change, low productivity growth, obesity, and even falling fertility rates. As with most modern trends, whether it's technology, entertainment, or housing crises, California leads the way. So to understand what lies ahead for the rest of the Anglo-sphere unless we change course, it's worth taking a closer look at the Golden State.
The state of housing in California is not good. The typical rent load is somewhere between 30 and 40% of their income, which is very high. Standards should be 30% or below.
The epicenter of California's housing crisis is the San Francisco Bay Area, where 80% of homes cost over $1 million, while renters can expect to pay an average of $3,300 per month.
The normal way markets work is demand goes up, prices go up, but this means that prices are above costs, which means you can make a pile of money by making more. And then people produce more when prices come back down. But in the case of housing in places like San Francisco, we never hit stage 2. Instead, prices have just gone up and up and up. You'll see that you've got lower income mobility because lower skilled workers who look at places like San Francisco and say, oh, the wages are high. If they think about it for another 10 seconds, so, oh, wait, but the rent is really high too. And if they then crunch the numbers, they'll see, oh, I would be poorer if I moved to get a better job.
To see what's going on, perhaps the best place to start is the Mallister Lot. This is not a reference to the Mallister house, or Kevin and his adorable if grossly negligent family, but San Francisco's Mallister Street, specifically number 600, where we find a surface-level car park just around the corner from City Hall. Given the huge demand for housing, a few years back the landowner had a radical idea. Instead of using this land as a parking lot, why not build some housing? In July 2019, an application was submitted to City Hall to build a 14-story apartment block of 196 units. The application was accompanied by the mandatory environmental impact assessment, a traffic impact assessment, a shadow analysis at different times of the day and different seasons, and a wind study using a scaled physical model in a wind tunnel. This was in addition to the exhaustive list of assurances that the building would have little to no impact on air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, recreation, water, and utilities. Yet despite jumping through all the regulatory hoops, 5.5 years later, the parking lot remains. The Mallister case is not an isolated one. On Divisadero Street, plans to build 186 units on the site of an old car wash collapsed after 7 years of negotiating, designing, planning, and permitting. Elsewhere, on the Nordstrom parking lot, plans to build 495 units were submitted in 2017. But while Nordstrom has since left the city, those parking their cars have yet to be inconvenienced. Despite the restricted housing supply, demand remains extremely high, not just due to the Bay Area's world-leading tech scene, but as a progressive city. San Francisco prides itself in welcoming newcomers.
Open the borders. Everybody is welcome. And we're a refuge for gay teenagers from Kansas who want to come here, who are being discriminated against. We're a refuge for people of color whose voting rights are being taken away from in southern states. We're a refuge for those people. If they've got $1 million in their pocket, that's the rub. You're not welcome if you're poor, because we're not building any housing for you.
To understand how we got here, and to explore some possible ways out of this impasse, we need to go back in time a little. The 20th century saw a massive migration from the American interior to the West. In 1900, less than 2% of the US population resided in California, ranking it as the 19th most populous state, behind states like Alabama, Iowa, and Kentucky. By 1990, roughly 12% of the US population resided in California, making it the most populous state in the Union. During this period of unprecedented growth, the supply of housing rose to meet demand. But from the 1960s onwards, California introduced significant changes in how it handled land use. In 1969, California's largest city, Los Angeles, moved from a citywide plan to 35 community plans. And from 1970, the city's planned population was reduced by 60%, from 10 million down to roughly 4 million. Today, approximately 75% of residential land in LA is zoned exclusively for single-family homes, and this pattern has been mirrored throughout the state. San Francisco's 38% share is lax by comparison, but in the broader Bay Area, the figure is 77%, while in San Jose, it's 94%. The second major change in California came at the hands of Governor Ronald Reagan in 1970. The California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, was designed to protect the environment by requiring thorough impact assessments for new developments. While well-intentioned, it is a favoured weapon among housing objectors and has led to a raft of litigation in each of CEQA's 20 impact categories, which include air quality and traffic. In September 2016, the Obama White House weighed in on the issue of housing, highlighting the plight of workers getting pushed further and further from job centres, driving from Modesto to San Francisco, for example, often 2 hours each way, adding that excessive barriers to housing development result in increasing drag on national economic growth and exacerbate income inequality. The White House paper drew on research showing that in recent decades, the price of an average family home in the US has been climbing, adjusting for inflation, even though the cost of producing homes has remained effectively flat. This increasing ratio of house prices to production costs hasn't grown evenly across the country. When this ratio is plotted against approved building permits on a per-city basis, on the top left, we find San Francisco, where the average home costs almost 3 times what a home builder could profitably build it for, yet the number of permits remains almost comically low. At the bottom right, we find cities like Austin and Raleigh, with high rates of construction and a much tighter spread between house prices and production costs. So why doesn't San Francisco just go on a crazy home building spree to get prices down? This brings us to the NIMBYs. NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard and describes people who object to new housing in their neighborhoods.
It does seem selfish, but there's lots of people in California who say that is the reason to prevent it, is because I paid $300,000 for my house and it's worth $2.5 million now. And if you do anything to bring that $2.5 million down, then I'm gonna be mad about it, and probably I'm going to sue you about it.
According to 3 Boston University academics, people who oppose housing largely do not think they're being selfish. They believe they are community-minded neighborhood defenders. As one housing investor put it, "My hard-earned experience is that NIMBYs bring an extremely high level of passion, time, and anger to this issue. Meanwhile, those in favor of a development are usually less angry and passionate, and more likely to blow off a 4-hour slugfest at City Hall on a Tuesday evening." Each housing project is judged against the city's zoning plan, which is created in a process that is theoretically democratic. Residents can engage with City Hall every few years to have their say on zoning plans, but those attending zoning meetings are not a representative group. They tend to be older and are more likely to be anti-development homeowners than the broader population. And as for those who don't yet live in the area, they have no say. The rationale for zoning is that local people should decide what is built where, and should have a right to be protected from nuisances like shadows, noise, and traffic. Nuisance laws are not new, with the first cases appearing in English common law in the 1200s.
Human beings are just a whiny species. We're just natural complainers. We can find bad in almost any good. And if you create a system where you are very attentive to and concerned to address the complaints of everyone, you basically just wind up strangling progress.
Modern zoning is sometimes referred to as Euclidean zoning, a reference to a landmark 1926 US Supreme Court victory by the village of Euclid, Ohio over Amber Realty Co., which granted the village the right to decide what could be built where. The effect of the Euclid decision has been to set the US on a slippery slope to ever more restrictive zoning.
We had it right for the first 700 years. It's much better to go and put the burden of proof on the person complaining, have a very high standard, be ready to say no, like apartments don't count, the color of the paint of the house doesn't count, it's got to be like a really egregious, horrifying physical invasion, or we're just going to go and say the property owner can do whatever he feels like, tough luck. Sounds harsh, but it actually worked very well for 700 years. And it's only now that we have not had that for about 100 years that we see how wise the original policy was.
YIMBY, or Yes in My Backyard, is a counter-movement to NIMBYism that started in San Francisco in the 2010s, advocating for measures like upzoning to allow for more density. The movement has been met with entrenched local resistance. One local group, Neighbourhoods United SF, has a helpful website, which contains arguments that fall into 4 main categories: accusations of political underhandedness, victimization, left signaling, and appeals to anti-wealth sentiment. The website also contains a helpful voting guide ahead of San Francisco's recent mayoral race.
There is an inherent conflict of interest from elected leaders making land use decisions when they are beholden to the votes of the people who already live in the geographic district that elects them. We have this closed system where they can say whatever they want outward. We believe in more density and we want more immigration and housing. But then every 2 years or every 4 years, the little election booth comes up and they walk around with campaign flyers talking to just the 1,000 people that are going to vote for them. And a supervisor district is a fairly small district, and say, no, really, I'm going to protect this, right? And so you say what you need to say to get those votes. And we don't have a way to override that.
The divide between NIMBYism and YIMBYism doesn't fall along traditional political lines.
You've got the right NIMBYs who are just really interested in protecting their property values. They love shortage. And then you have left NIMBYs who are anti-gentrification. Don't build market rate housing anywhere near. We don't want those yuppies. We don't want those techies. We don't want those people coming here. If you build market rate housing, they've dubbed it luxury housing. That's all we'll get.
Gentrification is one of the most contentious issues in housing. It refers to wealthier people moving to an area, which can result in rising property values and changing amenities. This is not an imagined concern, as it can also lead to the displacement or pushing out of longer-term residents. A detailed study on gentrification in San Francisco by the US Census Bureau found that new market-rate housing increases gentrification and reduces displacement, which is to say that new construction draws more wealthy people into an area but reduces the risk of residents being evicted or pushed out of the neighborhood. This is consistent with similar findings by the US Federal Reserve, which finds that the best way to protect residents from an influx of wealthy newcomers is to increase housing supply, which helps to absorb this new demand. Few things provoke as much satisfaction among the public as seeing an intrusive and greedy developer fall on hard times. A UCLA study found that opposition to a development increases by about 20% when people are told that a developer will make a profit. But what exactly is a developer? The term is commonly understood to mean more than just a small home builder. It's somebody who borrows money to build housing at scale. In that sense, a developer is a bit like a movie producer. Somebody who obtains financing and brings a project together. But instead of turning money into movies, they turn money into housing. Yet, while movie making entails large degrees of risk and uncertainty, movie producers are rarely described as speculators, greedy, or evil.
The evil in front of developers has kind of become redundant. It's just a given. It is mind-boggling that the people who are the source of the solution to this problem, the people who build housing, are somehow the villains of the play. They're the bad guys.
Ireland's economy is basically a clone of the Bay Area, with its biggest tech giants basing their European headquarters there. Combined with the country's own NIMBY struggles, the Irish housing market is running hot. If you'd like to lend to small Irish home builders and earn average returns of over 7%, you can do so with Property Bridges, which is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland, and loans are secured against the property. Our thanks to them for sponsoring this episode, and to our Patreon members, who chat with us on Discord and help keep the channel going. Back to the US, San Francisco is 7 miles by 7 miles at the top of a peninsula. To the south are the affluent San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, and the city of San Jose, the heart of Silicon Valley. This tiny area is home to global giants like Nvidia, Apple, Alphabet, and Meta, each of which is valued at more than $1 trillion. According to one study, lowering land use regulations in New York, San Francisco, and San Jose to the level of the median city would increase US output by 9.7%. And given the cutting-edge innovation that this region produces, any limit on its growth is not just a loss for California or the US, but the whole world. So what can California do to improve housing affordability? Before we turn to potential solutions, as a thought experiment, let's imagine that instead of solving the housing crisis, you wanted to create one and make a lot of money in the process. You identify high-demand cities like Raleigh and Austin, where the cost of housing is close to construction costs, and spend millions of dollars building new housing. Once completed, you donate lavishly to neighborhood defender groups and NIMBY politicians. The goal being to move to the top left of this graph and double or treble your investment. To do so, you deploy every tactic in the NIMBY playbook to promote infighting among your opponents. Gentrification is the greatest sin. State governments are oppressive, and developers are the essence of greed. If there's a housing project that is 40% affordable, you block it by saying it should be 60%. If it's 100% affordable, you say it should be public. Meanwhile, no tree or old building in Raleigh is too precious, no community in Austin is too vulnerable, and every bat, goose, or bee in between is a rare treasure. And if politics fails, you simply start suing people. The great advantage of this strategy is that you are accelerating what is a natural process. With prosperity comes NIMBYism, especially if this prosperity involves an influx of Californians. Needless to say, this is not to be tried at home. But given that this graph is a few years old, it's probably too late anyway. As for actual solutions, these invariably involve construction, which has hard costs, like materials, labor, and equipment, soft costs, like taxes, architects, and environmental consultants, and land. Housing pressures put politicians under political pressure to do something, and they often resort to what we'll call well-intentioned bad ideas, or weebies, which raise all three costs. Some examples include, nobody should be impacted by housing developments. All apartments must be very spacious and have a balcony and parking. We should protect the character of our neighborhood with height limits. We should have the highest building standards in the world. Needless to say, for the word weebie to take its place among the great acronyms of housing is something I'd love to see happen.
It's not going to happen.
With bad ideas out of the way, we turn to credible ideas, starting with public housing, which has enjoyed success in cities like Vienna and Singapore. This model is often favored by progressives who feel that markets have failed.
Well, how would we know if markets have failed? Like show me the place where we've had no regulation and we still have housing price at the San Francisco level. I don't think there's any place like that. But yes, if you're to say public housing specifically, why not do that? Just to give credit where credit is due, I will say, out of all of the bad responses to high housing prices, public housing is one of the least bad. Why? Because it actually involves increasing supply. The normal thing is just to pump up demand while doing nothing about supply, which is just adding fuel to the fire. At least here they're talking about building something. So I want to give proper credit and say, at least you were in the ballpark of the correct solutions, which is to increase supply. Then the question, all right, so then why not do it my way? And the answer is public housing. We have a long track record with it. And in general, the track record is very poor. Higher than private sector cost, lower than private sector quality. And then on top of it, normally it's got actually most of the same regulatory problems or all the same regulatory problems as private sector development.
95% of our existing housing stock was built by a market rate developer for profit. 5% of our housing stock was built by the government, essentially, publicly subsidized housing. If your solution to the housing shortage is to push the whole solution through that 5% pipeline, then we're never going to get to anything close to what we need to get to in terms of production. The wonderful people, and I say this with all sincerity, the wonderful people who build affordable housing, we support every affordable housing project, every bond measure to raise money for affordable housing. It's mission critical that we build it.
Most of the housing we built needs to be in the already developed low density neighborhood communities that we have. Things like backyard cottages, 3-story triplexes, duplexes on every lot. That is the solution.
Brian Kaplan's graphic novel, Build, Baby Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing Regulation, takes readers on an entertaining journey through the academic literature on housing, making the case for what Kaplan called the panacea policy, housing deregulation. This means no more zoning, no more impact assessments. If you own the land, you can build. Full housing deregulation certainly makes Kaplan a radical, but with housing shortages causing so many societal issues, maybe some lawmakers will be open to radical thinking, especially given how entrenched and successful neighborhood defenders have become.
A lot of what I say in my book is obviously calm down, and usually your complaints are hysterically exaggerated. But on top of that, also, while we're making lists of everything that could go wrong with housing, how about we make another list about everything that go right and make sure that gets read? Because normally every single comment at a public meeting is negative. There's almost never anyone going and saying, oh, it's wonderful building homes because families will move in and they'll have kids, and maybe one of those kids will be friends with my kids, so let's do it. Instead, much more, oh, there's parking, there's traffic, there's noise, or look, there's all the things you're complaining about. And there's a whole bunch of other great things that you never even mention. At least let's have both on the table before you think about whether this is something to stop or curtail or to encourage.
If we zoom into Apple's headquarters, in the surrounding area we see rows of nice single-family homes on some of the world's most valuable land. If economists are to be believed, densifying neighborhoods like these would unlock huge gains for society. But wouldn't it be government overreach to force higher density on these communities? Zillow estimates that this house is worth $2.2 million. But how much would it be worth if the owner could build up to 6 or 8 stories? While this would impact the immediate neighbors, it follows that the neighbors would also be allowed to build if they chose to do so. In legal terms, restrictive zoning means that the positive rights of those trying to build are suppressed by the negative rights of neighbors to be protected from nuisance. It is the job of the law to facilitate human flourishing, and given the widespread and well-documented impacts of housing crises, perhaps the adults on the US Supreme Court will be asked to re-enter the room as we approach 100 years since the Euclid decision. Alternatively, relief to California's housing pains might come via the political route, through the ongoing struggle at state and federal level to reform CEQA and get cities zoning for higher densities. Such political battles rage across the US and indeed across the English-speaking world. In New Zealand, for example, Auckland has combined its 7 councils into one and engaged in significant upzoning, which has succeeded in increasing supply and dampening house price growth. But there are signs that wealthier neighbourhoods have shielded themselves from the most significant upzoning and protected historic villas built before 1940, though the word historic is perhaps pushing it. Needless to say, housing politics is messy, and politicians have a tough job. As for us voters, wherever in the world we find ourselves, if we want to address so many societal issues in one go, we can stop squabbling over the type of housing and support the tilting of the legal balance back in favour of property owners trying to build. I'd love to know what you think. Would you like to see more public housing, upzoning and modest reforms, or more radical solutions like full deregulation? In any case, I hope you found this video helpful, and be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified about our next episode. You can also join our Discord channel and chat with us and our members using the Patreon link. And if you're looking for gift ideas, look no further than Build Baby Build.